What's happening, folks? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. You know, these days I'm not easily surprised by stories concerning the rampant militarization of U.S. police forces. After all, when towns of less than 4,000 people are getting mine-resistant ambush-protected armor vehicles, or MRAPs, on a regular basis, it's hard not to become jaded. But what happened recently in Los Angeles truly takes the armed absurdity to a new level. See, last week, a FOIA request revealed that the Los Angeles School Police Department acquired 3 grenade launchers, 61 M16 assault rifles, and 1 MRAP, thanks to a federal program that distributes excess military equipment to cops around the country. Well, after receiving extreme backlash over the program, the department announced it would return the grenade launchers, but hold on to those rifles and MRAP, just in case it has to terrorize students playing hooky. Listen. The arming of regular cops with these weapons of war is disturbing enough. But the fact that someone actually signed off on giving grenade launchers to a department that serves over 600,000 school children is downright psychotic. But at least we can rest assured knowing that the cops are being properly trained to use these weapons, right?
There is no requirement for training for any of these departments that are getting these vehicles.
We can't provide training to police departments, Senator.
Excellent. Untrained police officers with grenade launchers in classrooms. What an excellent way to keep kids safe. Now let's break the set.
Speculation has been replacing hard fact.
Terrorists don't read Twitter.
Who's right and who's wrong?
It was a terrible thing to say, period. The mistake entirely on me.
Real
3 years ago this week, something amazing happened here in America. Thousands staged a mass demonstration against corporate greed. And in an unprecedented move for millennials, they didn't leave. Instead, they camped out, reclaimed space, streets, and sparked up Occupy camps around the country. The naysayers said Occupy Wall Street didn't have a unified message. But the movement was rebelling against an entire system, and that's why it posed such a threat. The establishment said Occupy Wall Street died, but you can't kill an idea. And the monumental shift in consciousness represented by the movement continues to this day. This week in New York City, activists have been celebrating the anniversary of OWS and are planning to take the city by storm this weekend in one of the most historic climate marches in history. To talk more about it, I was joined earlier by Occupy organizer Dennis Traynor, host of Acronym TV. I first asked him to talk about what events are commemorating Occupy Wall Street's anniversary.
In Zuccotti Park, Lower Manhattan, where Occupy Wall Street was born 3 years ago, there was a small but boisterous group coming together to mark the day, to reform connections that had been, and bonds that had been formed over the course of several years. But really what's happening in New York right now is the buildup and the energy for the global climate convergence, the UN climate march on Sunday, and then on Monday, next week, the flooding of Wall Street, where massive civil disobedience is planned, trying to create the connections for people outside to see the connections between capitalism and climate justice, and the heart of it, again, in Wall Street.
And considering the police response to Occupy and now seemingly any protest, especially what happened in Ferguson there, how can people practice civil disobedience or even just protesting without facing just wanton arrest and abuse from police?
Well, think of one of the most iconic images of our time is that young man in Tiananmen Square standing in front of a tank. I think that in the United States, more and more, we're going to have opportunities to create those types of images. So as activists, we not only have to think about placement and when and where we organize, but we have to think consciously about what is the headline we want to write in tomorrow's non-mainstream media or non-corporately affiliated media like Breaking the Set. What is the picture that we want to accompany that headline? And then we have to bring those headlines and those pictures into being to tell the stories that we need to tell, to get out from under the boot of capitalism, the boot of the military-industrial complex, of social and racial injustice, all of it.
Let's talk about the offshoots from the movement, Dennis. Of course, the strike debt projects bailing people out in a way that government only seems to do for corporations. Talk about some of the other offshoots that have sprung and sprouted out of Occupy.
For me, Occupy was always a web, right? Like a spider web that interconnected all these different issues. And for me, the one group and the one campaign that is moving forward with this web mentality is the Global Climate Convergence. So 2 days before the climate march here in New York City and 3 days before the UN climate meeting in New York City, the Global Climate Convergence is going to take place, a historic event that realizes that we need people, peace, and planet over profit. So they're connecting the dots between militarism. Our U.S. foreign policy, as your show well documents, is a blowback-inducing, homicidal bull in a cultural, religious, and geopolitical China shop. And the expense of that foreign policy, the surplus that comes from that foreign policy, we see manifest now in streets like Ferguson, Missouri. And we're going to see manifest all over the country. Secondly, the idea that our way of life, that is ruled by neoliberalism, that our U.S. foreign policy is now in attacking ISIS, is still hell-bent on keeping in place, is not sustainable. We can't keep it up. It's not so much about an immoral or immoral war. We can't continue to wage these wars to support this global neoliberal agenda anymore. So to me, what's exciting out of Occupy is this global climate convergence, and people can check it out at globalclimateconvergence.org.
You know, I feel like, though, the biggest problem with social justice movements, and I wanted to get your insight on this, is kind of the amount of infighting and the amount of egos kind of in the middle of there. I mean, as someone who's been organizing, how do you deal with these obstacles?
Well, I mean, that's a great thing that you'll see that play out in Bill McKibben's march on Sunday, right? So on the one hand, you're going to have a wonderful photograph of Times Square being filled with humanity, with hundreds of thousands of people. But on the other hand, this is a march that anyone could have joined. And Christopher Hedges rightly called it a climate-themed theme park march. You know, and it's going to end as far away from the United Nations as possible, just to get the permit. So that is a result of, I think, regressing to the mean. 350.org saying we're not going to offend or step on anyone's toes, and we're not going to deal with that infighting. But yes, every little fiefdom, whether it be the labor movement or the social justice, racial equality movement, the debt movement, military-industrial complex, and the peace movement, all have their little fiefdoms, and people have worked their lives and carved these places out, and they don't want those positions usurped. But like anything else, right now we have to put those differences aside and come together and realize that the climate is going to put an end to us all, right? You know, by 2050, we're talking about major levels of sea rise and change with the polar ice sheets melting. So I don't necessarily have the magic bullet to tell you how on those conference calls and in those meetings to navigate around the different personalities, except that we have to figure out a way to come together for the common good.
Thank you so much for on-the-ground reporting, for all of your work organizing. Really appreciate your insight. Dennis, Trainer, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Abby.
This time last year, an offshoot project organized by Occupy Wall Street activists announced that they had wiped away $15 million of medical debt, relieving over 2,600 people from financial ruin. And in continuing with this tradition, Occupy's Strike Debt Initiative announced this week the abolishment of $4 million worth of student debt belonging to 2,700 people who had taken out private loans for college. And while that may seem like just a drop in the bucket, considering that student loan debt is now well over $1.2 trillion, this movement is just the beginning of a much larger campaign to illuminate the mirage of the entire debt system. See, right now, creditors sell the debt to other firms at 3 to 4 cents on the dollar. And then these agencies go on to hound and torment millions of people into forking over their entire life savings. But the success of Strike Debt comes from the fact that this organization is purchasing the debt and then canceling it altogether, instead of using it as an extortion tool. What a concept. And don't think that the debt crisis is just affecting younger generations. According to a study released earlier this month by the Government Accountability Office, student debt among Americans 65 and older has increased from $2.8 billion in 2005 to a staggering $18.2 billion today. Listen, student debt may not be the most compelling issue, but it's one at the very heart of why our financial and educational systems are so broken. From the moment that millions of graduates step foot off a college campus and into the, quote, real world, their hopes and aspirations are weighed down by a financial ball and chain. And unlike other forms of debt, college debt is virtually impossible to escape, even through bankruptcy. But it doesn't have to be this way. Take a look at just a handful of the countries that offer free post-secondary education. Everywhere from developing economies like Morocco to industrialized societies like Finland. But grassroots organizations like Strike Debt may finally be turning the tide when it comes to people empowering themselves to solve the problem rather than the government. Not only by relieving debt outright, but by exposing the predatory scheme behind the facade of a world-class education. Yesterday, I featured a debate about the safety of GM foods between the political director of the Organic Consumers Association, Alexis Baden-Mayer, and Dr. Kevin Folta, a horticulture professor at the University of Florida. Unfortunately, due to human error on our end, Dr. Folta's satellite feed dropped out 3 minutes before the end of the debate. As a result, Dr. Folta accused us of deliberately cutting him out of the conversation, which of course was not the case. As such, we reached out to Dr. Folta to provide his statement on GMO labeling, which he would have made yesterday. He writes, "Labeling laws are not scientific. They are devised by activists and lawyers, not by scientists and farmers. The new bureaucracies spawned to label, test, enforce, and litigate their crusade against a single unliked biotech company will be expensive, with the greatest impacts on farmers and the poor. If people want a right to know, they should take the time to learn. The science says that this is safe and effective technology. Why spend millions for no reason other than to buy peace of mind for those that reject science? Finally, science is not a democracy. We don't vote on if vaccination works or if the earth is 6,000 years old. We should not cave into supporting clunky and unneeded legislation that tarnishes safe technology and arrests further innovation that will continue to help farmers, the environment, and the needy. We will work hard to make sure this error doesn't happen again in the future." Coming up, my exclusive interview with a boy nearly beaten to death by Israeli police. Stay tuned.
I'm the resident, and I know words are powerful. Words like cheap, as in people who buy the crap our media sells us are acting like a bunch of sheep. Or words like greedy, as in our entire financial system is rigged by a bunch of greedy jerks. Or words like consumers, as in there's more to life than just being gluttonous consumers. I'm the resident, and I'm fighting idiocy one carefully chosen word at a time.
The catalyst behind Operation Protective Edge this summer was the killing of 3 Israeli teenagers in the West Bank, which led to Israeli officials vowing retaliation against Hamas. And in the days following the discovery of their bodies, 16-year-old Muhammad Abu Qadir was kidnapped and burned alive by a group of radical Jewish settlers looking for revenge. This brutal murder sparked protests demanding justice for Muhammad and his family. It was during one of those demonstrations that Muhammad's cousin, 15-year-old Tarek Abu Qadir, was arrested and viciously beaten by Israeli police. Little did they know that at the time, Tarek was an American citizen and that the video of his attack would go viral. So to discuss these events as well as the quest for justice in both cases, I was joined earlier by Tarek Abu Qadir himself, as well as his mother Suha and their lawyer Hassan Shibli. I first asked Tarek to describe the events that surrounded his cousin's death.
Earlier that day, at around 4 in the morning, I was actually driving by and I saw him sitting down in front of his house by himself, just laying down, like sitting down on the steps. I drove by and I said hi, and I was on the way to get some food. I went to the bakery to get some food. I came back, and then I found the cops there at the same place that where he was sitting, and that made me think, that something bad happened, maybe to Muhammad. So I went up, and a couple of people were there, not much, maybe 3 or 4 people were there from my village, and I asked what happened, and then right away they told me that Muhammad was kidnapped. And then, well, at that point I thought that something was really bad was gonna happen to him, and I really hope that it didn't, but it was too late.
Heart-wrenching, and our condolences go out to your family for Muhammad's tragic death. Of course, after the news spread that there were protests, to which the Israeli police responded very heavy-handedly, which brings me to what happened to you. Tarek, describe the events that led to your arrest and beating.
It was so frightening that I actually saw people get shot right in front of me with rubber-coated metal bullets, and it's inhumane to see that, because how could that happen? There's so many things were going through my mind. Is my cousin, I couldn't believe my cousin actually was murdered. I thought he was still there with us. I felt like he never left, but it was hard to bear with. And I was on the side until I heard soldiers running from behind me, and I thought they were just gonna go run past me until they began to run after me. And that's when I panicked and began to run. That's when I jumped the fence on my left, and that's when they grabbed me and slammed me onto the floor. And they began to beat me until I was unconscious, and even when I went unconscious, they began to kick me and punch me continuously.
Well,
to clarify, to clarify the facts that happened. So Tarek is on the side. He's watching this protest unfold. The reason the people are protesting is because for days, Israeli civilians had been threatening the Palestinian youth in that community. In fact, they had tried to kidnap youth several times repeatedly, and the Israeli police weren't doing anything. In fact, when the Palestinians were asking the Israeli police for protection, the Israeli police would mock them. Even after Tarek's cousin was abducted and people found out that he was killed, the Israeli police said, you know what, they've killed one of you, and now we need to get 300 more for those 3 Israeli teenagers that were brutally attacked earlier. So the police were instigating the situation, and Tarek was watching the protest from the side. He sees kids running towards him. He sees soldiers running behind them, and when he sees the kids running, he gets freaked out, scared, and that's when he starts running. He tries to jump a wall to get away from those Israeli officers, and that's when they grab him, slam him in the ground, tie his hands, and knock him unconscious.
Why do you think that you were targeted, Tarek?
Because all Palestinians are targeted. All Palestinians are being beaten every day and being tortured every day and being taken into custody without any charges filed every single day. And in fact, actually, yesterday, one of my cousins just recently got out of jail from being arrested the day after I came back from Palestine, and he was arrested and then let go. And then just yesterday he was arrested again with my other cousin, and they're both taken to jail, and they're still in jail as we speak.
Why do you think that your congresswoman in Florida did not immediately call for Tarek to be returned to the U.S., and what was your reaction to other representatives accusing him of being part of the demonstrations as though somehow that justified this horrific beating?
My office had direct interaction with the Congresswoman's office, and it was very clear she was almost afraid to get involved. It seemed like she was more concerned about the interests of those Israeli police officers involved in the beating of Tarek, more than she was concerned about her own constituent who was beaten by those Israeli police officers. She failed to respond adequately in time to our repeated requests. In fact, what's really interesting is during that week she had time to send out a statement calling for people to save the manatees of Florida, but she didn't have time to issue a public statement demanding the safe, immediate return return of Tariq and that those officers be brought to justice. Meanwhile, other congressmen and even the president himself very publicly demanded that Tariq return home safely, and yet his congresswoman didn't fail to do so. In fact, when we met with the State Department in Washington, D.C., they told us, that Congresswoman Kathy Castor was extremely unhelpful in this whole ordeal, and that's a big shame. She needs to put the interests of her own constituents above the interests of Israeli police officers.
And I just want justice for what the Israeli police did to me, and I don't want it happening to any other person, or especially another child.
Right. I mean, a 2012 report by Breaking the Silence found that Israeli forces maintain very little restraint in dealing with Palestinian children specifically, according to one testimony of a soldier describing how they actually break up protests. He said people are made to fall on the ground, soldiers with the clubs go over to beat them. A slow runner was beaten. That was the rule. I'm wondering, Hassan, considering how territories are policed like this on a daily basis, do you think that the world would even know about Tariq's beating if he wasn't an American citizen?
No, because look, there were 2,000 Palestinian civilians brutally killed by Israel over the past couple months in its onslaught on Gaza, and many Americans don't know the names of those Palestinian civilians who were brutally killed. There are many children right now who are beaten by Israeli police and are still in prison. In fact, many of Tariq's cousins right now have been brutally attacked by Israeli police and are in jail right now without facing any charges, and that's all made possible by our tax dollars, and yet we don't know their names, we don't know their stories, and the fact of the matter is that's because they're not American. And it's also because we were very fortunate in this case that at least there was video evidence of the beating Tariq received to expose to the world the great injustice that the Palestinian people are dealt with on a normal daily basis at the hands of the Israeli police.
And Suha, your family was fortunate enough to return to the U.S. Just before Israel's ground invasion of Gaza, but what happened to your family and their homes after you left?
Yes, their homes were raided. The males in the home were taken into custody, again, with no charges. It was just devastating. It was devastating to hear all this, after we had left. They apparently took it as a form of retaliation, I guess, against Tariq, since, he got the word out and, his video went viral. So I guess the Israeli police, wanted to retaliate and take them into custody.
The State Department's been on record saying they're very concerned about the Israeli government and the Israeli police in particular retaliating against the Kader family, and that's just unacceptable.
97% of complaints against Israeli forces are never acted upon, according to Yesh Din. And do you think that the facilitation of this indictment was just because of the backlash? There were other officers beating him. What's happening to them?
Well, that's what we're wondering. We're wondering why one officer is being prosecuted and the rest are let go. Not only the other two that were with him in the video, the other ones also that when he got to the jail, he was denied medical attention as well from the officers in the jail.
Yeah, Tariq, what happened to you once you were actually arrested after being severely beaten?
Only after 6 hours of being in jail blindfolded, they finally took me to get some medical attention, and I went to the hospital after 6 hours of being in jail and then came back from the hospital the same night that I was beaten.
Yeah, they waited 6 hours after his father had followed him to the jail and pleaded for them to take him to get medical attention.
Suha, what would accountability look like to your family, of course, not only for this beating, for the death of Muhammad?
I think these people, the Israeli extremists that caused the death of Muhammad, should be brought to justice. This is like a normal thing for the Israeli police to have them off on an insanity plea. I think they should have given them time, sentenced them.
It's very important that the individuals involved in the murder of Tariq's cousin, Mohammed Kader, are brought to justice. And it's very important that all the officers involved in brutally attacking Tariq, beating him unconscious, and then denying him medical treatment are brought to justice in a transparent process to send a message that this kind of behavior isn't tolerated by the Israeli government. Because otherwise, the fact that you only have one Israeli officer right now charged with any crime really sends a message that they're almost trying to scapegoat that one officer and try to appease the public that, look, we're doing something, without really addressing the root cause of the problem, which is that there's a system in the Israeli government that tolerates the gross abuse and civil rights violations of the Palestinian people. I mean, it's just unconscionable to think that a country that calls itself a democracy, calls itself an ally of the United States, routinely beats young Palestinian children and throws them in jail without any charges. That's just unconscionable and unacceptable, and that's why it's critical that all the officers involved be brought to justice and Israel changes how it deals with the Palestinian people. We really have to look at the sort of statements made by many Israeli lawmakers that dehumanize the Palestinian people, and that's the problem. The Palestinian people are systematically being dehumanized, and that's what's allowing these officers to beat a child. I mean, how else can you beat a child unconscious unless you don't view him as equal to you, unless you don't view him as a human being? And that's the problem here. I believe that the Palestinian people are facing this sort of mistreatment at the hands of the Israeli government simply because they share a different ethnicity and a different religion than those in power in Israel have. And it's because of that that they're treated as second-class citizens and denied very basic human rights and due process of law.
What's next for the case? What can we do to help get justice for this family?
Well, one, it's very important that the media continues to expose the great injustice that has happened to the Palestinian people on a daily basis, because had it not been for the media's exposure of what happened to Tariq, he may still be in jail today.
And Tariq, as an American citizen and as someone who is also Palestinian and who has been over there, has seen the atrocities firsthand, who was a victim of them, do you have any message for the American people? I mean, we are paying $3.5 billion a year to kind of sponsor this entire situation.
I just want everyone to spread awareness and show the brutality of the Israeli soldiers to the Palestinians, because me myself, I want to go back to Palestine so bad, because I don't want to abandon my family over there, because that's where my family is and that's where we come from, and that's why I want to go back so bad, because it feels like a different place for me, and I feel a specific way when I go over there.
And it's very important we get justice in Tariq's case, not just for the sake of Tariq and his family, but to send a clear message that that kind of abuse of power and authority is unacceptable, so that no other child, whether he's Palestinian, Jewish, Christian, Israeli, Arab, whatever he is or she is, never goes through that same sort of brutal treatment that Tariq went through. Exactly.
We're all one human family, and it's about time we start treating each other like that. Thank you so much, you guys. Amazing to have you all on. Hassan, Shibli, Tariq, Suha, Abu, Kader. Really appreciate it, you guys. Thanks for watching this show, you guys. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Abby Martin. Join me again when I break the set all over again next week.
Yeah, I take no prisoners, you call it aggressive, but all I see is lies coming out in your message. I keep it audacious, speaking the facts. We break the paradigm with truth intact. The people don't need to be fed propaganda, spoon-fed fabrications.
System, and that's why it posed such a threat. The establishment said Occupy Wall Street died, but you can't kill an idea. And the monumental shift in consciousness represented by the movement continues to this day. This week in New York City, activists have been celebrating the anniversary of OWS and are planning to take the city by storm this weekend in one of the most historic climate marches in history. To talk more about it, I was joined earlier by Occupy organizer Dennis Traynor, host of Acronym TV. I first asked him to talk about what events are commemorating Occupy Wall Street's anniversary.
In Zuccotti Park, Lower Manhattan, where Occupy Wall Street was born 3 years ago, there was a small but boisterous group coming together to mark the day, to reform connections that had been and bonds that had been formed over the course of several years. But really what's happening in New York right now is the buildup and the end.
Speculation has been replacing hard fact.
Terrorists don't read Twitter. Who's right and who's wrong?
It was a terrible thing to say, period.
The mistake entirely on me.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. These words are hard hitting, you're watching your neck, but you need to tune in because we're breaking the set.
3 years ago this week, something amazing happened here in America. Thousands staged a mass demonstration against corporate greed. And in an unprecedented move for millennials, they didn't leave. Instead, They camped out, reclaimed space, streets, and sparked up Occupy camps around the country. The naysayers said Occupy Wall Street didn't have a unified message, but the movement was rebelling against an entire What's happening, folks? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. You know, these days I'm not easily surprised by stories concerning the rampant militarization of U.S. police forces. After all, when towns of less than 4,000 people are getting mine-resistant ambush-protected armor vehicles, or MRAPs, on a regular basis, it's hard not to become jaded. But what happened recently in Los Angeles truly takes the armed absurdity to a new level. See, last week, a FOIA request revealed that the Los Angeles School Police Department acquired 3 grenade launchers, 61 M16 assault rifles, and 1 MRAP, thanks to a federal program that distributes excess military equipment to cops around the country. Well, after receiving extreme backlash over the program, the department announced it would return the grenade launchers, but hold on to those rifles and MRAP, just in case it has to terrorize students playing hooky. Listen. The arming of regular cops with these weapons of war is disturbing enough. But the fact that someone actually signed off on giving grenade launchers to a department that serves over 600,000 school children is downright psychotic. But at least we can rest assured knowing that the cops are being properly trained to use these weapons, right?
There is no requirement for training for any of these departments that are getting these vehicles.
We can't provide training to police departments, Senator.
Excellent. Untrained police officers with grenade launchers in classrooms. What an excellent way to keep kids safe. Now let's break the set.
Energy for the global climate convergence, the UN climate march on Sunday, and then on Monday, next week, the flooding of Wall Street, where massive civil disobedience is planned, trying to create the connections for people outside to see the connections between capitalism and climate justice, and the heart of it, again, in Wall Street.
And considering the police response to Occupy and now seemingly any protest, especially what happened in Ferguson there, how can people practice civil disobedience or even just protesting without facing just wanton arrest and abuse from police?
Well, think of one of the most iconic images of our time is that young man in Tiananmen Square standing in front of a tank. I think that in the United States, more and more, we're going to have opportunities to create those types of images. So as activists, we not only have to think about placement,